the Sooners coming off a bye week, Jason. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is get healthy, get anybody who's nicked up ready to go, time to reset, time to refocus. And from a health standpoint, again, get ready for the stretch drive. On the other hand, based on what players and coaches said, based on just your own observation, do you think there was anything in particular that seemed to be the focus of the off week?
I think, there was a couple of guys, Mark, that you'd mentioned just from just from just trying to get some of those kids back healthy. Our Mason Thomas is one that is a freshman this year, but has showed some promise. I think he's been a little bit banged up. I think he's in a position where he's probably a little bit ready to. Much more ready to go than he has been over the last couple of weeks. So I think that's big for a defensive line that has really struggled getting pressure on the quarterback over the last really kind of outside of the non-conference games. So I think that'll be good for that defensive line. Billy Bowman's a guy that we thought think may potentially be back. I'm hearing that that's probably not the case. He's probably closer to a Baylor or maybe even a Texas Tech, return. So that's again something that's difficult in the back half of the secondary for Oklahoma to be able to be successful, obviously. And if you're not able to rush the passer at a high level, your secondary has got to get into a position where they can hold up, really well. But which they haven't done. But I think one of the things we saw last a couple of weeks ago was Key Lawrence played probably his best game of the year in that safety spot. So if you can get some continued, good play out of that secondary, it gives you an opportunity to to be successful. And as we mentioned last week, Mark, against the team Iowa State that has, they've had a lot of close games, but they're not, they're certainly not one of the top offensive teams in the league. At this point through four conference games, only scoring 65 points. So I think you're optimistic if you're Oklahoma being able to play a little bit better defense this week against maybe a team that's not quite as explosive as a couple of the teams that you've played.
Yeah, Iowa State has struggled on that side of the ball. We know what they had last year and in really the previous 3 to 4 years with Xavier Hutchinson on the outside, Charlie Kohler, one of the best tight ends in college football, Brock Purdy, a veteran quarterback, an offensive lineman that littered the Big 12 and the national lists of top offensive lines and offensive linemen. And really, Hutchinson was the guy that came back after they lost all that, plus Breece Hall. And, you never know how a program and how a team is prepared to respond. And you would think that this would be a possible outcome at a school like Iowa State that just doesn't cycle in 4 and 5 stars like it's nothing, like we see with the Georgia defense picking up its top 2 to 3 status in the country, even though they lost a ridiculous amount of NFL talent, a record there that Iowa State kind of ebbs and flows. And of course, Matt Campbell's really good at what he does, and he's built that program to a certain level to where they're not going to drown out in terms of what we've seen in past decades out of Iowa State. But still, they have definitely hurt from suffering those offensive losses in what was probably the best offensive set of skill players and offensive line and complete unit that they've ever seen in the history of the program.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. I think, but the one thing that you can say is conversely, yes, they've struggled on the offensive side of the ball, but they've been, statistically speaking, the best defense in the Big 12 through 4 games. They've only allowed 79 points, so less than 20 points per game on the defensive side of the ball. So, obviously Iowa State wants to grind this out and make this very much a sloppy fourth quarter defensive game because, if it's a defensive game, obviously, if you're Iowa State, you like your chances there. But they've been able to play really, really sound defensively. I think it's anchored by Will McDonald on the defensive line for them. But yeah, to only give up 79 points through the 4 games is, like I mentioned, the best in the Big 12. And then they held Kansas to 14 points. They held Kansas State to 10, Texas to 24. Yeah, a lot of good defensive and close games, unlike a couple of the Oklahoma games that certainly weren't close. So they're a little bit maybe even more battle tested than Oklahoma from a defensive perspective, knowing some of the same teams, but they certainly played better on the defensive side, much better than Oklahoma has with those common opponents, Kansas State, and Texas on the schedule at this point.